Do you speak ancient Arabic, by the way?
I could read and do a bit of grammar.
A bit of grammar. You don't speak it then?
No, no.
So your presumption that it's beautiful ancient Arabic is just a presumption. You actually don't know what you're talking about.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I'll respond.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that question because I don't speak Turkish. I wanted to see if you spoke ancient Arabic. Well, I just want to ask, do you speak ancient Arabic?
Yes, I do.
Fluently?
No, but I do speak it.
Okay, but not fluently.
كيف حال?
Because we didn't evolve to know about it. We've learned about it. We force our idea of common sense to change. It's called learning. Some people would rather read an ancient book than learn. And this has been a very good evidence of that. You are rather gorgeous. Gorgeous George over here. I watched some of these and they're always exactly the same. So I thought they'd be different this time. And it always begins with you and I'm supposed to respond to you. And I will to some extent, but it's hard to respond to nonsense. And in fact, the point of this is not a question, does God exist? That's not the question. It's atheism or Islam or atheism, which is more sensible, I think is what it says, or something like that. Now, I was just shocked because I thought that you wouldn't bother to try and pretend you knew science, because you don't, and we're going to go through that in real detail. Everything you said is nonsense when it comes to science, so we'll go through and we'll have a little chat if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, good. And so I found it remarkable that you began with that kind of nonsense, and we'll continue from that. But let me just first begin with the fact that the premise of this debate is in some sense inappropriate, because it suggests two things. First of all, it suggests that Islam is something special, and it isn't. It's not special at all. It's one of 1,000 religions or more that have existed since the dawn of humanity, all of which claim divine revelation, all of which claim perfection, all of which proclaim infinite knowledge, uniqueness, beauty, etc. So Islam is just a religion like any other religion. And there's no difference. It proclaims, just as the Rig Veda did and Akhenaten in ancient Egypt, that the universe had a beginning, nothing special, okay? There's absolutely nothing special. The question is, Islam as one of 1,000 religions, all of which make the same claims, but mutually inconsistent ones. So one of the things we know is, of these 1,000 religions, they all make mutually inconsistent claims, so they can't all be correct. In fact, at best, one of them can be correct, because they're not consistent with each other. So that means a priori, just a priori, and I know like that, you like that term instead of a posteriori. I've heard you say that. A priori, Islam has a probability of 0.1% of being correct, because it's just one of 1,000 religions, and one of them at most is correct. But since they all make the same claims, it's probable that none of them are correct. So treating Islam specially is inappropriate. Then atheism is somehow, as has been described, a belief system. It's not a belief system like Islam or Judaism or Christianity or the Norse myths or Zeus or Thor or any of the other myths that have been created throughout human history. All it's saying is, it's not a belief system. It's saying, you know what? We don't choose to believe that stuff because it's not sensible. So it's not saying we believe X. It's saying, well, this myth is inconsistent with this myth, or this myth is inconsistent with what we know about the universe, and therefore, it's unlikely to be true. So what atheism is just saying, this is unlikely to be true. It's not a belief system. So to compare one versus the other is, of course, false. It's a false premise. The first part of the false premise is that atheism is that Islam is special. Not special at all. It's been there. It'll be gone, or be there as long as other religions. It's just like all the rest. And atheism is not a religion. It's just, in fact, what it could be described as common sense. Okay, what makes sense? I will think that those things that make sense are likely, and those things that don't make sense are unlikely. In fact, that's what science is all about. Okay, so having said that there's nothing special about Islam, and there certainly isn't. I'm going to talk a little bit about, my intent, by the way, is, the other thing I should say is, debates, I'm an educator. It's, a flaw, but it is what it is. That means I believe in actually trying to illuminate ideas and lead to discussion, critical thinking, and eventually learning things and increase in knowledge. Debates aren't meant for that. Debates are rhetorical devices for people to go out and perform, make statements, and then challenge others and try and convince an audience of something. That's not education. So I will talk a little bit about some of this, and then I just want to have a chat. I'm going to use my 25 minutes to have a little chat. I'll take up my time when I could pontificate, as we've heard, and just ask some questions, because I'd actually like to learn some things, okay? And hopefully in the process there'll be some education for both of us.
Nearly every culture has made the same claims of revelation and cosmic truth. Ancient Egypt's Book of the Dead described creation from chaos. Hindu scriptures talked about multiple universes long before Islam, and Greek philosophers like Democritus suggested an infinite cosmos. The Quran, far from being unique, repeats older myths. For example, Surah 1886 says the sun sets into a muddy spring, an ancient flat earth belief. Surah 86 verse 6 claims humans were created from a fluid gushing forth from between the backbone and the ribs, which contradicts modern biology and reproductive science. Even the claim of scientific miracles in the Quran falls apart. Muslim apologists often point to Surah 2130, saying it predicts the Big Bang. But the verse simply says the heavens and earth were once joined then separated, a common creation myth, not science. Compare that to real evidence. The cosmic microwave background radiation discovered in 1965, which actually confirms the Big Bang, a discovery from physics, not scripture. And Islam's specialness today often reveals itself through control, not truth. In countries like Saudi Arabia, apostasy and blasphemy are punishable by death. In 2020, a Pakistani professor was sentenced to death for allegedly insulting Muhammad.
As I've often said, common sense, our deductions might suggest that you cannot be in two places at once. That is crazy. But of course, an electron not only can be, but it is. It doesn't make sense because we didn't evolve to know about it. We've learned about it. We force our idea of common sense to change. It's called learning. Some people would rather read an ancient book than learn. And this has been a very good evidence of that. For example, to say something is inconceivable just means you can't conceive it. But the great thing about the universe, and the reason that I do science, is that the universe has a much greater imagination than we do. In fact, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And that's what's wonderful about the universe. Things that are inconceivable happen all the time. And what that does is that expands our mind. And expanding our minds to conform to the evidence of reality is common sense. And that's what, when you call atheism, that's what that is. That's just saying, I'm going to accept the evidence of reality, and if something seems like it contradicts the evidence of reality or is irrational, I should question it. Now, there are a lot of ideas which gorgeous George over here, no, Mr. Tzortis. Tzortis. I've been to Istanbul and I'm trying to learn Turkish, but Tzortis, Mr. Tzortis. It's okay. Do you speak ancient Arabic, by the way?
I could read and do a bit of grammar.
A bit of grammar. You don't speak it then?
No.
So your presumption that it's beautiful ancient Arabic is just a presumption. You actually don't know what you're talking about.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I'll respond.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that question because I don't speak Turkish. I wanted to see if you spoke ancient Arabic. Well, I just want to ask, do you speak ancient Arabic?
Yes, I do.
Fluently?
No, but I do speak it.
Okay, but not fluently.
كيف حال?
Well, you know what? There's a real language that you don't speak. It's called the language of mathematics. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this nonsense about infinity. Let's take something physical. Let's draw a circle and draw a diameter. What's the ratio of the distance of the circle to the diameter? Do you know?
You're the teacher.
Do you know?
You're the teacher.
I know. I'm asking you a question. I want to have a chat.
I don't know anything.
Well, you've demonstrated that, but you ever heard of pi?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Oh, do you know what it is?
3.14 question you're saying.
How many decimals does it have?
I don't remember.
An infinite number.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so the physical distance of the ratio of a diameter of a circle to its circumference is an infinite number.
Yes.
What do you know? Now, when we talk about, what's amazing to me is you quoted Aristotle as the basis of science. Of course, Aristotle was the one that told us objects fall in proportion to their weight, because he actually didn't do the experiment. He deduced it based on what he wanted. Galileo, of course, did the experiment, right? And we know, let's do the experiment here in front of you. So I'm going to take this object and this object.
Yes.
Aristotle would tell me which would fall first. Will you tell me which would fall first? Guess,
Okay.
if you don't know.
The book.
Okay, look, you were right. Great. Okay, good. Why?
Because there's resistance
Resistance to what?
to the paper, right?
Okay, exactly. Aristotle didn't know that.
Yes, he didn't.
Okay. Aristotle also claimed that infinity was impossible because indeed, as you pointed out, the distance from you to me could be divided into a half, and then a quarter, and then an eighth, and then a 16th, and that's an infinite thing. It makes it impossible.
Yes.
Well, the thing that Aristotle didn't know how to do, and you don't know how to do, is to sum an infinite series. 1 plus a half plus a quarter plus an eighth plus a 16th adds up to 2.
Yes.
Okay, so that kind of argument that infinity is impossible, it just doesn't make sense mathematically. Infinities do occur. Now, it is true in my book that I said infinite density or infinite energy is a concept that appears to be in contradiction with the evidence of physics. But that doesn't apply. All infinities are impossible. In fact, space could be infinitely large. There's no presumption that space isn't infinitely large. It could be. What we now know about physics suggests it probably isn't, but there's no law of physics that says space can't be infinitely large. So this notion that you deduce that infinity is impossible because you don't like it is just not the way the world works. Because infinities happen all the time, whether you like them or not. Not only that, it doesn't lead to irrational actions. Mathematicians have a way of dealing with infinity. We can add infinities. We can take numbers and an infinite series that, for example, the series 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 to infinity actually has, in mathematical terms, can have a finite sum. It's minus 1/12, if you wanted to know. Okay? It may not seem logical to you. It may seem inconceivable to you that the sum of a series of positive terms, each of which is bigger than 1/12, could end up being minus 1/12. But the fact that it's inconceivable to you just means you're ignorant.
Thank you.
Okay.
Krauss is right that the universe doesn't bend to our common sense. Quantum mechanics shows particles exist in multiple states at once, something religion never predicted, but science has proven again and again. Islam, by contrast, depends on outdated, common-sense claims written in the 7th century. The Quran in Surah 86, 6-7 says humans are created from a fluid that comes from between the backbone and ribs, a belief rooted in primitive anatomy, not biology. Meanwhile, science has mapped DNA, showing life comes from genetic code, not vague, gushing fluid. Krauss's point on infinity also matters. Mathematically, infinity isn't nonsense. It's foundational. Pi is infinite, and calculus uses infinite series to describe motion and gravity. Yet Islamic scholars like Al-Ghazali argued infinity is impossible, trying to defend the idea of a finite, created universe. Modern cosmology shows otherwise. Space itself may be infinite, and even if it isn't, there's no physical law preventing it. That's why Hawking's models, inflation theory, and quantum cosmology all describe possible infinite structures, far beyond what Scripture imagined. Religious texts resisted these discoveries. Aristotle said heavier objects fall faster. The Quran says mountains were placed to keep earth from shaking, Surah 16:15. But Galileo proved weight doesn't matter, and plate tectonics shows mountains are products of earthquakes, not their cure. Every time, science corrected what common sense, or Scripture, got wrong. That's the difference. Atheism adjusts to evidence while Islam clings to error.
Now, this idea that Occam's razor suggests, first of all, Occam's razor is not a principle of science. Okay, it's a nice idea that you should try for the simplest answer to any question, and physicists try and use that. Sometimes the simplest answer doesn't work. In genomics, for example, it'd be nice if every gene, every in fact, you talked about more than one cause for an effect. It'd be nice if every disease was caused by a single gene. One of the reasons that genomics is so difficult is we've discovered there's a complex interaction of genes, so that in fact, that there are many separate causes of most diseases. There are very few diseases that have a single cause. But in fact, you know what is simpler than the number 1? The number 0. 0 is a much simpler reason that there's no cause. Okay, so if you really wanted to apply Occam's razor, in fact, you'd apply no causes. Now, you also use the term causality, which is a term I understand. You didn't define it. Do you want to define it?
I may do.
Well, why don't you do it now?
I don't want to give you that favor.
Oh, I thought we were going to have a chat.
Yeah, but I want to have a chat, not a chat. So it's less rhetoric, more connection.
No, let's have a chat. No, I think we talk about rhetoric. We were talking about the lecture you just gave. I want to have a chat. I'm asking you a question. Do you know what causality means? You use the term.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
I mean, if you use a term, you should know what it means.
yes.
Okay,
I have my
you use it.
definition. I have my definition.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll define, and that's, cause precedes effects. Does that sound good?
No, that's a wrong definition. In my
Okay.
opinion.
Well, I'd like to learn what it is.
Well, for example, there's an interesting book about the quantum physics and causality, and the philosophers and philosophers of science and scientists have disagreed on a specific definition. So they've reduced back to a fundamental definition. Do you want to have a chat or a chat?
Good. You quoted a book on physics.
Yeah, I haven't finished yet.
Physicists don't disagree about the definition of causality.
Have you presumed your results here? Do you really want to connect with me as a human being?
No. But
you've asked me a question, you're answering it for me? I mean, come on.
You quoted physicists. Go on.
I said scientists.
Okay.
Now, which is the same, I agree. Now, so from my limited knowledge, and I do believe it is limited, of course, is that the agreement has been on something which produces an effect, which includes, therefore, you can have something called asymmetric spontaneous causality, where the cause exists prior causally, but not prior temporally. So there is a whole range.
What's prior causally, not prior temporally?
Prior causally means that there is I'll give you an example. The Kantian example was you have an infinite ball that's on an infinite pillow. Now, they both, time doesn't exist here, but you're not going to say that indentation is not as a result of the ball. So there is a causal dependency there, and time is out of the window. So we could discuss causality until the cows come home, but it's not as simple as what you're trying to say in terms of that. It doesn't presume temporality. Do you see?
Well, I think it does. I think, again, if you think carefully about what you just did, the ball doesn't create an indent in a pillow. And by the way, you used infinite. I thought we weren't allowed infinite. But anyway.
It was an example.
Yeah, well, it's an example of a physical example, which you said doesn't exist if it's infinite. But it doesn't matter what's infinite. A pillow here, a finite pillow and a finite ball.
Yes.
Okay? There's an indent.
Of course there is. Yeah.
Okay, was the ball there or not?
Well, my example wasn't based on finitude. It was based on they're both infinite.
Well, but if the ball isn't on the pillow, it doesn't create an indent, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so it had to be. So was it put on the pillow or not?
Well, that's irrelevant. You're damning the example. That's a logical fallacy.
No.
Get the point I'm trying to say.
The point is that the physical causes have physical effects. So either the ball is on the pillow or not. Now, the point about causality is that the interesting aspect of it is that's an interesting physical question. But what if there's no before? Let's take, you talked about the cosmology. So let's take general relativity, whose equations I'm sure you don't know. And
I said I don't know anything.
The beginning, you made it very clear that the beginning of the universe is very important. You deduced it, but in fact, deduction doesn't matter. The point is, the universe, our visible universe, did have a beginning because we can measure it. Whether we liked it or not, or whether we think it's sensible or not, it actually did have a beginning, a factor not in dispute. Our universe had a beginning. Now, however, the laws of physics tell us, right now, if we extrapolate back to the beginning, that if we took it at face value, that time didn't exist before t equals 0. So if time doesn't exist at all, the sense of cause doesn't even make sense. And this is the key point. In science, we have to realize that our common sense notions sometimes go out the window. When we observe effects, they have causes. But at the beginning of time, when time itself may have come into existence, then that question becomes a bad question. Philosophers can debate it, people can write it down, but it doesn't matter. Now, the other thing I will say is you've somehow talked to me about the fact that the Quran as a literary document is different than other literary documents. And you've given some arguments that I understand. What I actually did this the other day because I've seen you give this talk a gazillion times. I actually input in a computer a lot of Arabic words and asked them to produce it at random, and I produced 2 sentences from the Arabic in from the Quran in 11.6 seconds. My computer speaks neither Arabic nor is Arab, but produced that those incredibly divine words. Now, the other question, of course, I would have is, and this is a common sense question, is why did God choose Arabic, or Aramaic, or Greek? I mean, doesn't he speak English? Or the Americans always think he does, which is why they invented the Mormon religion. So the question I want to ask is, what makes sense is to ask not the details of the Quran, which I don't want to dwell on, because it's just one of 1,000 different religions, all of which make the same claims, and all of which, if you look at them a priori, are equally ridiculous from a priori common sense notion. For example, and I got this from my late friend Christopher Hitchens. Is it sensible to assume that humans evolved in their present form somewhere between 250,000 to 1 million years ago? So you have a God who creates a universe and has 4.5 billion years of life evolving, and then Homo sapiens evolve and live in incredibly awful conditions for 250,000 years, and suddenly, in the middle of the desert, in a cave where no one can see it, he takes some poor schmo and says, I'm going to tell you the truth. And not only that, I'm going to allow you to save humanity. And in fact, if people don't believe you, they're going to go to hell for eternity, and we can talk in great length, in great sadomasochistic length about the torture they're going to have, and we can all enjoy it. Now, what about all those poor 250,000 years of people, of real people who were struggling to exist and survive, those poor people who were existing before that God decided to give his revelation to Muhammad? Why that? Why would a sensible God wait that long? And of course, the interesting question you have to ask is, why are the revelations always done when no one can see them? If you're asking a court of law, you'd say, well, you know what? It just doesn't make sense. Why don't once it doesn't call down from the sky so everyone can hear them? Why is it always given to people in private who then claim they've had a revelation? Now, why should I believe Muhammad's revelations any more than anyone else's? In fact,
Krauss makes a strong point. When we talk about causes and the universe, science shows us that our common sense ideas often collapse. In physics, time itself began at the Big Bang. If time didn't exist before, then asking what caused it is a meaningless question. This destroys the Islamic claim that everything must have a cause, and therefore God must exist. The Quran in Surah 2130 says the heavens and earth were once joined, but that's a vague myth, not science. It doesn't explain cosmic background radiation, inflation, or quantum fluctuations. Real evidence that shows how the universe expanded without divine intervention. And the claim that the Quran is uniquely divine, easily tested. Krauss showed a computer can generate Quran-like verses in seconds. That undercuts Surah 223, which challenges doubters to produce a chapter like it. Machines can do it today, proving it's not beyond human or natural capability. Even the language argument collapses. If God wanted truth for all humanity, why limit it to 7th century Arabic, a language only a fraction of the world could understand? That's not universal truth, that's local tribalism. Krauss also echoes Hitchens. Why would a God wait 250,000 years after humans evolved before revealing himself in a cave, in private, to one man? What about the billions of people who lived and died before Islam existed? Surah 385 says, anyone who seeks a religion other than Islam will never be accepted. That condemns every human being before Muhammad to hell. an idea that's cruel, not divine. And why are revelations always hidden? Moses on Sinai, Jesus in the desert, Muhammad in a cave. Always secret, never open to the world. If truth mattered, God could reveal himself in every language, in every age, to everyone at once. Instead, what we see is mythology repeating itself, tailored to local cultures, then enforced with threats of eternal torture. So here's the question. If God truly wanted all of humanity to know the truth, why would he reveal it in secret visions to a handful of men, in languages most of the world can't understand, and only thousands of years into human history? Doesn't that sound more like myth than reality? If you found this breakdown helpful, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Islam's foundation holds up under science and history? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more fact-based analysis, and share it with someone who still thinks ancient books explain the universe better than science does.
We're all born atheist, you know, and then that gets changed or enhanced. I mean, there shouldn't even be a word for atheism. It shouldn't exist. Shouldn't need it. There's not a word for not believing in fairies, you know? And if people didn't keep inventing these weird, impossible deities, we wouldn't have to go around denying them. What's up with that?
Well, if you're a believer in God, if you're a Christian, as many tens of millions in America are, you could see you as poking fun at their religion.
Not at all. How many people thank God every time they say thank God? I don't get offended. Do I?
But you must be aware that a lot of people in America would potentially find that offensive.
What? Because I'm saying I don't believe in God?
Yeah, because you're kind of mocking them, you know.
No, I'm not. I'm not mocking them. People's beliefs aren't my concern at all. I certainly don't differentiate between religions either. I look at all religions the same. Unlike religious people, I look at all religions equally.
You were religious till you were about 8 years old, is that right?
Yeah, I was brought up a Christian, yeah.
And what happened to change your mind then?
I used to go to Sunday school all the time. I believed in... Well, you got to realise that when you're a working class kid, I came from a very poor working class background. My dad was a labourer, my mum was a housewife. I lived in a poor estate, over here, like the projects. Right? And to a working class mum who, her hope isn't that you become a doctor or a lawyer or an international comedian, it's that you don't die in a barroom fight. And they think the best way to do that is to take on Christian values, which preach immorality, but they haven't got the monopoly on good. This is my point. I'm not a Christian, but I live my life in a good way. And some people say, well, who says what's good is? Well, do you know what? I do. I'm good to people because it's the way I want to be treated. And I don't believe I'll be rewarded in heaven, but I do believe...
What do you think will happen to you?
I'll be rewarded now.
But when you die, what do you think happens?
People who liked me or remember me.
Are you a spiritual person, do you think?
Well, not in that sense, but I get a funny feeling when I see a friend or a mountain or an animal. It fills me with joy. My first love is science and nature, but it's explainable. And just because I don't think that I'm going to go to heaven, I don't think my life's worthless. I don't think...
It's not really that. I always think with atheists, because I do believe, and I was brought up a Catholic and remain so.
Sure.
But, I think everyone's entitled to their own beliefs,
Absolutely.
whatever they may be. The problem for atheists, it must be so doom and gloom. When you get to like 70, 80 to think, well, hang on, that's it.
Oh, of course.
That's the end of everything.
That's right, yeah.
So you must fear death 10 times more than Christians, don't you?
Why? I don't believe there's anything after.
Because it's the end.
But you're saying you believe because the alternative is too terrible.
That's not why I believe, but certainly it's a very comforting thought to think that I don't think it all ends in the box under the ground.
But I can't help what I believe any more than you can. And it's up to you what you believe in. And this thing about not believing in God, there are 2,780 odd gods. And so if you're a Christian, you believe in one of them and you don't believe in all the others. I think religion's greatest trick wasn't convincing some people that there was a God. who was all-powerful. It was convincing everyone else that you couldn't ridicule the idea. It's when you get them. I think there'd be more atheists and less faithful if you weren't allowed to teach anything, you weren't allowed to mention any gods or any beliefs or atheism, right, until they were 20. I think we'd see a different pattern. The human brain, when it's young, is a sponge. It has to be. It has to take in all the information. It has to trust its parents, its elders, to survive. Without question, don't touch the fire. Why not? Don't go near don't go near the wolf. Don't touch that spider with a red bit. Don't touch that. Why not? Just don't. There is a God. What? There is a God. And if you're bad, you go to hell. Okay? And if that's constantly confirmed, like all the other things, wolves eat you, black widows kill you, fires burn you, if it's given that same level of credence and truth, you're never going to get over it. It's going to be a lot harder to undo that. I think the myths came up, maybe, often as a stopgap to knowledge until we find out more. The earth is flat. No, we've proved now. Okay, the earth's not flat. We were wrong. Okay. But that's not personal. You don't take that personally. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your afterlife, And so they often want to hold on to that, right? But only because of the way they've been conditioned. We know it's fun to tell children there's a Santa Claus and there's fairies at the bottom of the garden and all these cute things. It's cute till they're 7 or 8. If they're 34, it's a bit embarrassing socially. This is my son. What's he doing? He's looking for fairies. Is he? Okay, we better leave. If you're born in India, you're probably a Hindu. If you're born in America, you're probably a Christian. Born in Pakistan, probably a Muslim. Why did the universe open? And if they say, well, he's always been around, well, let's just say the universe has then. Let's just cut out the middleman. It saves time.
Ricky is right that morality doesn't belong to Christianity alone. History shows countless moral systems before the Bible. The Code of Hammurabi, written in Babylon almost 1,000 years before Moses, already outlawed murder and theft. Ancient Egyptian texts like the Book of the Dead taught judgment for how you treated others. Science also proves morality comes from human empathy. Brain scans show areas like the prefrontal cortex and mirror neurons drive compassion and fairness, not divine command. He also makes a strong point about where you're born shaping your religion. Pew Research confirms that nearly all people inherit their parents' faith, meaning a child in India grows up Hindu, in Pakistan Muslim, and in the US Christian. That proves faith is geography, not truth. Even the Bible admits this inconsistency. Exodus 25 says, God punishes children for the sins of the parents, which sounds more like cultural inheritance than free belief. And the question of who made God remains unanswered. Christian theology claims God is eternal, but if you allow that, you can also accept the universe as eternal. Modern cosmology even explores quantum models where the universe doesn't need a creator. The Big Bang Theory, supported by cosmic background radiation and redshift data, explains the beginning of space and time without invoking a deity.
We're all born atheist, and then that gets changed or enhanced. I mean, there shouldn't even be a word for atheism. It shouldn't exist. Shouldn't need it. There's not a word for not believing in fairies. And if people didn't keep inventing these weird, impossible deities, we wouldn't have to go around denying them. It's a matter of degrees. If you go around feeling good because whatever life throws at you, it'll all be okay in heaven, that's great. Doesn't affect anyone. Fine. If you pray that you'll do well at work, and then you try hard and do well at work, and you believe it was the praying, fine. You know, we know it wasn't. We know the praying was irrelevant. We know praying without actually doing anything doesn't do anything. Praying and then working towards something. Praying to me is like making a list. That's all it does. It may even motivate you. It may even, you know, it's getting your thoughts clear. Thinking there's someone hearing you and changing stuff, that's something else. But again, still not harmful. But if you start doing crazy stuff because God's telling you to, that affects me. I've got to stop you there. And if someone goes around saying there is a God and bad people go to hell, fine, doesn't affect me. If they go around saying there is a God and bad people go to hell, I'm going to help God send them to hell by stoning them to death. Whoa, he doesn't need your help. He's all powerful. Chill out. God's got this one. I think it's very important you challenge your own beliefs. I mean that's what science does, really. It doesn't constantly try and prove itself right. It follows the evidence, whatever that is. In fact, it tries to prove itself wrong. It doesn't sulk. When science thinks something and then it discovers it was wrong, it doesn't sulk because it found that out too. It's a question I often get, that people say, well, you're an atheist, you know, you're closed-minded. Well, no, I'm not. You know, that's a strange thing to say. I think the opposite is true. I'm going to always follow the evidence, whatever that is. And they say things like, if someone proved to you God existed, would you believe? Well, of course I would, by definition. In fact, it would be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. Scientists would celebrate. They'd run round. At the moment, we have no evidence for the existence of any God or anything supernatural. Never have. Possibly never will, but who knows? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. When someone puts forward a jar of God, we test it for its godliness, and if we find there's anything godly in it, we'll write it down.
Psychologists confirm that children are born without religious belief. Faith develops later through teaching and environment. A 2017 study in cognitive science showed that religious concepts only take root when children reach an age where authority figures introduce them. This matches the global pattern. Religion overwhelmingly aligns with geography, not truth. Prayer has been tested scientifically, and results show no supernatural effect. The 2006 Harvard-led STEP project, which studied over 1,800 heart surgery patients, found no difference in recovery between those prayed for and those not. In fact, patients who knew they were being prayed for had more complications, likely due to performance anxiety. Religious violence proves Ricky's warning. The Crusades, witch trials, and modern-day jihad all stem from the belief that God commands violence. Even Scripture endorses it. Deuteronomy 13:10 orders believers to stone their own relatives for following other gods. This shows how faith can justify actions no moral society would otherwise accept. By contrast, science is self-correcting. Newton's physics was replaced by Einstein's relativity, and both are now extended by quantum theory. No priest has ever revised Scripture when proven wrong. That's why science remains open, while dogma stays closed.
I get asked questions like, you know, well, what do you think it feels like when you're dead? And I always say, well, what did it feel like for the billions of years before you were born? Like that. And there's also this strange thing that I get from faithful people. Why don't you believe in God? Well, that's a very strange question. Why don't you believe in God? Well, you came up with it. Why would I? As to saying I don't know, well, if you're agnostic about God in all his glory and in all his impossibility, you've got to be the same about Santa. You have got to say, I don't know. I want to say to a agnostic, what's your best guess there? Go on, have a punt. In fact, I don't ask agnostic. I don't say to agnostics, is there a God? I say, do you believe in God? Now, you can't say I don't know to that question, because if you say I don't know, you're an idiot. What you don't know if you believe or not. And I had this discussion with someone on Twitter, actually, and he said, well, that's not true, because I can ask you, am I wearing a red jumper? And you have no way of informing your guess. And that's true. But now ask me if you're wearing a red jumper that created the universe. Now I can have a little guess. No. No, you are not. It's mental. If you throw a load of coins on the floor, no one arrangement is more amazing than another. And it's sort of like they work backwards. Because this is what happened, this is what we think is perfection. So we try and... We can't get around the fact that it's crazy, we've got two eyes. That's exactly where I put them. You know, these are brilliant. This is exactly... If I was making a person, I'd make it just like me. And it's hard not to think there was a will to it. But there wasn't.
Because anyone who follows you on Twitter, and you have a huge following, they'll know that you are a pathological atheist, and therefore the thought of death is very final for you. And for me, as a good Irish Catholic boy, it's the start of something new and glorious. For you, that's it.
And for me, it's the end of something glorious. So I have to pack it all in. But, you know, I'm not depressed about it. I don't want to die any more than anyone else. And I think there's this strange myth that atheists have nothing to live for. It's the opposite. We have nothing to die for.
You have more to live for.
We have everything to live for.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would imagine you have a more focused attention to life because you think it ends when you die.
I think it's precious. I think it's beautiful. I think the world is amazing. I love people, animals, art, every hobby. I can't believe my luck that I'm alive for these 70 or 80 years. Might be less. Wait, you know, I'm not long for this world. My nan used to say that. She lived till 83. I think it was 40 years ago going, I'm not long for this world.
What are you said the things you like. What are the things that really annoy you?
Only two things really make my blood boil, I suppose. I suppose in general, as I get older, injustice. Injustice quietly makes my blood boil. Either personal, social, political, personal. I suppose the two main categories are religious intolerance, this arrogance that you think, you know, arguing over whose God is right sort of gets me down a little bit, you know. And I've got no problem with spirituality. I really haven't. You know, that's another myth. And I always try and make the difference clear between spirituality and religion. One is a very personal feeling, a journey, a hope, or whatever, a need, you know, a joy. And the other is an organised body that uses that for power and corruption in many cases. In many cases. And I don't have either, but I suppose I think that when it affects me, that's when I have a say in it. And religion affects me. Religion's very real. Spirituality, it doesn't really affect me.
See, I find it as an irony, isn't it, when the people that attack you on Twitter for challenging them about their religious beliefs, they show the total disrespect to you for what is your belief. Your belief is you're an atheist and you just don't happen to believe in a deity or a god. I can respect that completely, whilst choosing myself to have a different belief.
Of course. And
you get very intense on Twitter. I mean, you get into proper battles with people.
Yeah.
Why do you take it so...
But it looks like battles. At home, I'm smiling.
Oh, you always...
I've got what when someone's arguing with me that the Earth is 5,000 years old, yes, I'm smiling. Yeah, of course I'm smiling. You know, the fundamentalist view of the creation of the Earth is rather like an episode of the Flintstones. So I have to laugh at those sort of things.
How does your atheism, which you're passionate about, how does that play with your American audience, given that so many people in America are God-fearing people and probably take exception to it.
Well, they shouldn't. We talked about this last time. Why should they take offence that I don't believe in their God or any other God? And I'd say to them, tell me the reasons why you don't believe in all the other gods, and that's the reason I don't believe in yours. And I've got nothing against people believing in God at all.
Cognitive science shows Ricky is right about death being like before you were born. Neuroscientists explain that consciousness arises from brain activity, and when the brain shuts down, awareness ends. That's why brain damage can erase memory, personality, or the sense of self. If an immaterial soul existed, brain injuries wouldn't change who we are, but they do. On agnosticism, philosophy backs Ricky's view. Bertrand Russell's celestial teapot argument explained that if someone claimed a teapot orbited the sun, the burden of proof isn't on others to disprove it. The same logic applies to God. If there's no evidence, disbelief is the rational stance. The design claim that eyes or the body are perfectly made is undermined by biology. The human eye has a blind spot and is wired backwards, unlike an octopus eye, which is more efficient. The recurrent laryngeal nerve in giraffes loops 15 feet out of the way instead of taking the direct route. These flaws show evolution, not intelligent design. As for religion causing harm, history is filled with it. The 30 Years' War killed over 8 million in Europe. Sectarian violence in Northern Ireland lasted decades, and today, blasphemy laws in countries like Pakistan still sentence people to death. Even Jesus condemned religious hypocrisy. Matthew 23 describes Pharisees using belief for power and control, echoing Ricky's warning about organized religion. So here's the question. If morality, meaning, and awe can be explained by science, history, and human nature, why keep clinging to ancient texts that divide us? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep unpacking these big conversations together.
There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people. And
right. Richard Dawkins, you've talked a lot in terms of religion being a pernicious virus. When you talk in those sort of emotional, quite visceral terms, are you doing that to sort of raise hackles and therefore heighten the debate, do you think?
I don't think I've talked a lot about it being pernicious. I'm not even sure I ever used the word pernicious.
But virus is a word you've
certainly virus. And the point there is really not the pernicious aspect, although I actually think it is pernicious. The point there is that it's infectious. It's something that grips the mind in the same way as a conventional virus, grips the body, in that it takes control, and it does so the better to propagate itself.
But in choosing words like that, or on occasion I've read that you've said you despise organised religion, or religious belief actually, they're very emotive terms for someone from an academic background. Are you doing that because you feel it's in the interests of the cause that you're pursuing, that debate is quite highly charged?
I wonder if they're as emotive as you think they are. I suspect that because we've all been brought up with this sort of culture of respecting religion, that anything comparatively mild sounds more outspoken than it really is. I mean, do you really despise religious belief? I despise people who believe something without evidence and then go out and take action which damages other people. Yes. So I despise people whose belief in religion is so firm and so unshakable that they actually think it justifies killing people. And there are, of course, many people like that.
But your average devout worshipper who's sitting in a pew of a Sunday morning, you don't despise them.
No, of course I don't, no.
What are your feelings towards them?
Well, I mean, they're harmless, especially Church of England. I mean, they're harmless. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. No, of course I don't despise them.
Here's the thing. I am an agnostic. I have thought about the tenets, certainly, of Christian belief. And as far as believing in God is concerned, sort of found them wanting, or myself unable to be convinced. But I still think that I can't possibly know whether God exists or not anymore. I mean, am I being sort of what's the word? Oh, weak-willed, guilty of not having the courage of my convictions.
No, I mean, I'm an agnostic too in that sense. In The God Delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 was total conviction that there is a God, and 7 is total conviction that there isn't. And I put myself as a 6. Okay, so that's kind of agnostic, but veering towards atheist. And I would be a 6 with respect to fairies and pixies and werewolves and things like that. But there are people who will say, because they're agnostic, that puts them absolutely right in the middle. The probability of there being a God and there not being a God is exactly 50-50. And that, I think, is the wrong sort of agnostic to be, because I think you can sort of put a probability figure on it. You can say, well, I think a God is very unlikely, but I can't actually disprove it. So I'm not a 7, I'm a 6.5 or something like that. And that's where I would put myself.
Dawkins' idea that religion acts like a virus actually lines up with what psychologists see in child development. Kids are wired to trust authority, which makes them easy to indoctrinate. That's why churches baptize babies or push to Sunday school so early. Once the belief spreads, it's carried forward like an infection of the mind. And he's right to despise beliefs that cause harm. History is packed with examples. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch trials, all justified by Scripture. Even in the Bible, Luke 19:27 has Jesus saying, "Bring them here and kill them before me." That verse has been used to excuse violence for centuries. The bigger point is about evidence. Dawkins puts himself at a 6 out of 7 on his scale. Almost certain there's no God, but honest enough to say he can't disprove it absolutely. That's science. You follow the probabilities, and the probabilities aren't close to 50-50. There's no evidence of a global flood, no archaeological proof of Israelites wandering the desert for 40 years, and no DNA evidence tying humans back to Adam and Eve. What we do have is overwhelming proof for evolution, the Big Bang, and genetics. And you see the shift today. Pew Research shows Christianity in the US shrinking fast while the number of people with no religion is climbing. The more people learn the facts, the less they rely on faith.
What about the fact that religion, in terms of its institutional influence, persists? How much does that irritate you? Or
it's weird that those countries that have sort of the trappings of theocracy remaining, like Britain, because we have bishops in the House of Lords, and we have lots and lots of faith schools, and we have the Queen is the head of the Church of England. It's an odd thing that those countries, like Britain, like the Scandinavian countries, which have an established church, seem to be the least religious. And a country like America, which has written into its constitution the separation between church and state, a wall of separation, as Jefferson called it, is one of the most religious countries, the most religious country in the Western world. So there's an odd negative correlation with what you might naively expect.
How do you explain that, do you think?
Well, various explanations have been offered. I mean, one explanation is that in a country like Britain, where religion is part of the establishment, it's become sort of boring. Whereas in America, where there's the wall of separation, religion has become free enterprise. And so you have mega churches with their own television stations, their own creches to look after the children, their own gyms. They've become huge commercial enterprises, tax-free, by the way, which helps, with the televangelists having private Lear jets to jet around in and fleets of posh cars and things.
It's not tea and biscuits.
It's a very, very big business, religion in America, whereas in Britain it's become sort of boring and people don't really take it very seriously one way or the other.
Politics is very reluctant to go anywhere near this. I mean, in terms of the solutions to some of what you're talking about, the only place we can look is to politics. The state has to act. Perhaps things have to be legislated for. And yet, I mean, there was a hell of a fuss when Ed Miliband recently said he was an atheist. There's a sort of, it goes back to what you said before, I think, about not offending religious sensibilities.
Yes.
There's a sort of twitchiness about religion.
I think that's
still.
True. Yeah, I think that is
And then
true.
I suppose my question, given the amount of energy you expend on this issue, how are you aim to get over that? Because it does stand in the way of society achieving the sort of shape that someone like you would like it to achieve.
Yes, and my colleague Dan Dennett coined the phrase belief in belief. Lots and lots of people are not religious themselves, but they've got a vague idea it's a good thing that other people are. It's very patronizing and condescending, by the way. It's sort of the attitude, well, you and I, of course, are too intelligent to be religious, but the common people need it. And there are a lot of people who actually think that. A lot of people think that we need religion in order to be moral. There are a lot of people who think that if you took religion away, people would start, rushing around, smashing shop windows and robbing and raping and things like that. No evidence for that whatever. I mean, absolutely none. So I think one important thing we've got to do is to prize apart religion from morality. It's absolute nonsense to say that you need religion in order to be moral. And so I think that would be one major step we could take. You don't need to send your child to a faith school in order to instill in that child a sense of morality, a sense of good citizenship.
For whatever reason, even in a secular country like this, we have arrived at a point where there's a sort of latent belief within the popular consciousness that to be scientific is to somehow be sort of desiccated and dry and to miss out on the magic and mystery of one's experiences and the world and so on. You dispute that, right? So
not only dispute it, I mean, it's just the exact opposite of the truth. Science is wonderful. Science is amazing. The fact that you can understand why you exist, who could not be turned on, who could not be excited by that? Who would ever want to live in a world where you live your life, you go to work, you go to the office, whatever it is, you go to the football match, and this goes on year after year, and then you die. And you don't have any understanding of why you were there in the first place. That's desiccated, that's dry. What is not dry and desiccated is coming into the world, as it were, awakening in the world, and awakening in the fullest sense of seeing the universe, seeing the stars, seeing down a microscope, seeing what's inside every single cell, seeing what's inside the brain, and marveling at this wonderful gift of life that we have, albeit temporarily, marveling at this gift of understanding why we exist and rejoicing in it for as long as we do exist.
Richard Dawkins, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What Dawkins highlights here is fascinating. Countries like Britain still have official churches, bishops in government, even a monarch as head of the Church of England. Yet they're among the least religious places in the world. Meanwhile, America, which is supposed to separate church and state, has become one of the most religious nations in the West. The difference is simple. In Britain, faith feels like old furniture. In the US, it's a booming business. Megachurches run TV networks, gyms, schools, and do it tax-free while pastors fly in private jets. That's not spirituality, that's enterprise. And Dawkins is right. People still cling to the idea that without religion, society would collapse into chaos. But the data proves the opposite. Secular countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Japan have some of the lowest crime rates and highest levels of social trust. Meanwhile, the US, with all its churches, struggles with mass shootings and inequality. The Bible itself doesn't give us a higher moral ground either. It condones slavery in Ephesians 6:5, and in Numbers 31, Moses commands his followers to kill men, but keep virgin girls as spoils of war. That's not morality, that's barbarism.
I tried to put a case for why we feel altruism, and because of once living in these small villages. And so
yeah, it didn't quite work for me though. Again, Richard, you're taking a particularly impressive and somewhat puzzling aspect of human behavior, radical altruism, the sort of Oskar Schindler who risks his life and ultimately loses it for people he doesn't even know, and saying, well, it's just a misfiring. It doesn't set well with one's sense as a human of how to admire it.
But okay, misfiring doesn't have to have the pejorative connotation that you've put on it. I mean, you could say that the desire to adopt a child. I mean, many people adopt a child. Now, that is a misfiring, but that's not as pejorative. I mean, it's an admirable thing to do. It's a wonderful thing to do, but it is a misfiring of the Darwinian impulse to want to rear a child of your own. And that's fine. It's a beautiful thing.
Then why do we admire it?
Well, we have the desire to rear to rear a child for good Darwinian reasons, which you and I would agree with. But then, when a couple cannot have a child, they have that desire. It's like the desire for sex, which you still have the desire, even though you're using a contraception. Similarly, you still have the desire for a child, even though you are, for one reason or another, unable to have a child of your own, so you adopt one. Now, that is technically a misfiring, but please don't think that I'm saying anything that pejorative about it. On the contrary, I think it's noble, as I think the sort of Oskar Schindler behavior is extremely noble.
But presumably you believe that the nobility we see in such an act goes beyond just an evolutionary thing. You believe that there's a real right and wrong that exists in the universe that we're kind of seeing and acting upon in that sense.
I do see that, and I am not happy dismissing it on purely materialistic grounds. But those who study sort of what's exceptional about humanity, they always come up with these three characteristics of what it is that we are attached to. One is truth, which at the moment is a little bit underneath fire, at least in my country. Another is goodness. Where does that come from? And the third is beauty, which we touched on, and which I also think can't be dismissed as we're just peahens. We see beauty in equations. We see beauty in music and in a patch of pink in the western sky at sunset, and it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of evolutionary benefit to us, and yet it matters, and it also lifts us in a certain way into a plane of something other than the sort of pure dailiness of our experience, some glimpse of something what Lewis calls joy, where you have just this sense that there's something more, if I could just grasp it, and then as soon as you try, it's gone. And that feels to me like a real significant experience that should not be dismissed as a neurotransmitter that just lost its way.
You keep using words like dismiss. I mean, I don't dismiss it. I exult in it. I mean, it's wonderful. It's beautiful. And the fact that you can give it an explanation is not to dismiss it or demean it or reduce it in some way. Yes, I mean, a sense of beauty, the sense of the enjoyment of Beethoven, it is actually firing of synapses in your brain, but that's not to demean it. It's still wonderful.
And incredibly wonderful. And it's not, Polkinghorne's line comes to mind that beauty is not something we should dismiss as just evolutionary, epiphenomenal froth on the surface of an uncaring universe.
But that's an emotive language again. It's not dismissing, it's not froth, it's wonderful, but it's explicable.
Here, Dawkins continues to explain why we don't need religion to be moral, even in his debate with Francis Collins. Collins points to radical altruism, like Oskar Schindler risking his life for strangers, and suggests that must come from something beyond evolution. But Dawkins shows how these actions fit perfectly within an evolutionary framework. Our instincts for kinship and empathy sometimes misfire outside their original purpose, leading us to adopt children, save strangers, or act selflessly. That doesn't make it less noble. It makes it even more beautiful that morality can grow from natural impulses, not divine command. And history backs this up. Non-religious countries like Sweden and Denmark consistently score among the highest on global measures of generosity, social trust, and human rights, with some of the lowest crime rates in the world. Meanwhile, Scripture often falls short. In Exodus 21, the Bible regulates slavery instead of condemning it. Yet people today recognize slavery as wrong because of human empathy and reason, not because religion told them. Even when it comes to beauty and music, Dawkins is right. Knowing that Beethoven's symphonies move us because of neurons firing in our brains doesn't make the experience less profound. Science explains the how, but the wonder remains. You don't need God to feel awe. In fact, understanding the natural explanation makes it richer. What do you think? Does morality come from religion or from our shared humanity? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.